In this episode, we move from broad risk reporting into a closely related skill that is just as important in mature organizations, because leaders do not make sound decisions only by hearing that risk exists. They also need to understand what the control environment looks like, how dependable it is, where it is strong, where it is weakening, and how much confidence they should place in the safeguards that are supposed to keep exposure within acceptable limits. For a beginner, reporting control information may sound like a narrow compliance task or a technical status update, but it is actually one of the main ways an organization decides whether a risk response is credible in practice. If decision-makers hear only about threats and possible impacts without understanding the quality of the controls standing between the organization and harm, they are missing a large part of the real picture. Good control reporting helps them judge not just what could go wrong, but how prepared the business actually is, and that makes risk-based decisions much more grounded and much more useful. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful place to start is by understanding what control information really means in this context. Control information includes the facts, observations, trends, and conclusions that help an organization understand whether its safeguards exist, whether they are operating as intended, whether they cover the right scope, and whether they remain strong enough to support business confidence. That information can come from assessments, testing, oversight activities, exceptions, delayed reviews, audit observations, management reviews, or performance trends tied to how a control behaves over time. A beginner might imagine control information as a simple yes or no answer about whether a safeguard is present, but mature organizations need much more than that. They need to know whether a control is reliable, consistent, timely, understood by the people performing it, and resilient enough to remain effective when the environment changes. Reporting control information, therefore, means presenting more than existence. It means presenting condition, quality, and implications in a way that decision-makers can connect directly to the level of exposure the organization is really carrying. That connection to exposure is exactly why this topic matters so much in risk-based decision-making. A risk-based decision is a choice made with conscious awareness of uncertainty, possible harm, business value, and the strength or weakness of the safeguards already in place. If leaders are deciding whether to continue an activity, accept residual exposure, delay a treatment effort, approve a new initiative, or invest in improvement, they need to understand how much trust they can place in current controls. Without that understanding, decisions can become too optimistic or too cautious for the wrong reasons. A leader may assume the organization is protected because a control exists on paper, while the real operating condition may be inconsistent, immature, or incomplete. The opposite can also happen, where concern remains high even though the control environment has improved meaningfully. Reporting control information helps prevent both mistakes. It gives the organization a firmer basis for judging whether current safeguards justify confidence, demand improvement, or require leaders to reconsider what level of risk they are truly willing to carry. It is also important to understand that control reporting is not the same thing as risk reporting, even though the two are tightly connected. Risk reporting often focuses on exposure, likelihood, impact, trends, treatment progress, and what might happen if conditions worsen. Control reporting focuses more directly on the safeguards that are supposed to influence that exposure by reducing likelihood, limiting impact, improving detection, or supporting recovery and oversight. The difference matters because a risk may remain significant even when controls are improving, and a risk may appear acceptable until control reporting reveals that the supporting safeguards are weaker than assumed. Beginners sometimes think controls are just one small section inside a larger risk report, but in practice, control information can change the meaning of the entire risk picture. A risk described as moderate may deserve more concern if key controls are not operating reliably. A risk described as serious may deserve more confidence if controls are strong, mature, and well-supported. Good reporting helps decision-makers see these relationships clearly instead of treating controls and risk as separate conversations that never truly meet. Audience matters a great deal here, because control information becomes more useful when it is shaped for the responsibilities of the stakeholder receiving it. Senior leaders may need a concise explanation of whether control conditions support confidence in current operations, upcoming initiatives, or previously accepted exposure. Process owners and control owners may need more detail about consistency, exceptions, evidence quality, and missed review points. Governance groups may need to understand whether control trends reveal isolated problems or broader patterns across the organization. One of the easiest mistakes for beginners to make is assuming that every audience should receive the same level of detail in the same form. In reality, the most effective reporting matches the message to the decision being supported. A board-level audience may need the business meaning of control weakness rather than the operational mechanics, while a management audience may need those mechanics in order to correct the issue. Reporting becomes much stronger when the person preparing it asks not only what is true about the control environment, but what this specific stakeholder needs to understand in order to act responsibly. Clarity is one of the most valuable qualities in reporting control information because controls can become hard to explain if people rely too heavily on internal terminology, technical detail, or process language that makes sense only to specialists. A control report should help the audience understand what the safeguard is meant to accomplish, what condition it is in now, and why that condition matters for the organization's ability to operate safely and responsibly. If the explanation is too abstract, stakeholders may hear that a control is partially effective, operating with exceptions, or showing maturity gaps, and still have no practical sense of what those words mean. Good reporting translates those conclusions into understandable implications. It explains whether management can rely on the safeguard fully, whether caution is warranted, whether additional oversight is needed, or whether a business decision should be delayed or revisited because the control environment is not as dependable as assumed. For a beginner, this is an important lesson because strong control reporting is not about sounding technical. It is about helping people who must make decisions understand what the safeguard is actually doing for them right now. Another important element is relevance, because not every detail about a control belongs in every report. Some information may be accurate, yet too minor, too procedural, or too removed from decision-making to be useful for the audience at hand. The person reporting needs judgment about which control facts help explain business confidence, residual exposure, or the need for action, and which facts simply create clutter. A control owner may care about very specific operational evidence, while a senior leader may care more about whether the control can be relied on and what consequences follow if improvement does not occur. Beginners often think thoroughness means including as much information as possible, but that can easily make a report less helpful rather than more helpful. Strong reporting selects what matters most and arranges it in a way that allows the audience to see the larger point. The purpose is not to prove that work was performed. The purpose is to support risk-based decisions by showing which control conditions strengthen confidence, which weaken it, and which deserve closer attention before a larger problem takes shape. Context makes that relevance much stronger because control information without surrounding meaning can be easy to misread. A delayed review, a rising exception count, or a moderate assessment result may sound concerning on its own, but the true significance often depends on what else is happening around it. Has the business recently changed processes, expanded operations, or taken on new dependencies that put more pressure on the control? Has the control recently been redesigned and not yet stabilized? Is the issue isolated to one area, or does it appear in several places? Context helps stakeholders see whether they are looking at a temporary strain, a growing weakness, or evidence that the control framework is not keeping pace with the demands placed on it. Beginners sometimes expect reporting to offer clean conclusions without much supporting story, but control information becomes far more useful when it is placed inside the operational and governance conditions shaping it. That context is what helps a stakeholder judge whether the issue deserves patience, attention, escalation, or immediate corrective action. Timeliness is equally important because control information loses much of its value when it arrives after a critical decision has already been made or after deterioration has already grown into a larger failure. Decision-makers need to know whether the control environment remains dependable at the moment they are being asked to accept exposure, continue operations, launch a change, or defer additional treatment. If the reporting cycle is too slow, leaders may continue acting on outdated assumptions about control strength. Good control reporting, therefore, matches the rhythm of the business and the pace at which the relevant safeguards can change. Some control information may be suitable for regular governance reviews, while other information may need faster communication because the weakness has immediate decision significance. Beginners sometimes think timeliness simply means sending reports quickly, but the deeper question is whether the information reaches the right audience early enough to influence judgment. A strong report delivered too late can still fail the organization, because the real value of reporting is not the document itself, but the decision quality it enables. Trend reporting is also very powerful in this area, because one snapshot of control performance rarely tells the whole story. A single assessment, one late review cycle, or one elevated exception count may deserve notice, but trends show whether the control environment is improving, stabilizing, or quietly slipping over time. That matters because many control failures do not arrive all at once. They emerge gradually through drift, repeated delays, accumulation of exceptions, weakening oversight, or increasing dependence on manual workarounds that were once considered temporary. Reporting those patterns helps decision-makers understand whether control issues are isolated events or signs of something more durable. Beginners often focus on whether a control currently appears acceptable, but mature organizations also ask whether the direction of travel supports confidence. A control that is still functioning but steadily deteriorating may deserve more attention than one that briefly dipped and then recovered. Trend reporting turns control information into a much stronger input for risk-based decisions because it helps leaders see where current conditions may be headed rather than only where they stand today. This is also where key performance indicators, KPIs, and key control indicators, KCIS, can add important value when they are reported clearly and interpreted responsibly. KPIs help explain whether the larger process or activity supported by the control is performing the way the business expects, while KCIS help explain whether the safeguard itself is operating with the consistency and reliability needed to deserve confidence. Reporting these indicators well means more than placing numbers on a dashboard. It means explaining what changes in those numbers suggest about performance, control health, and the likely effect on the organization's risk position. A beginner might assume the data speaks for itself, but indicators always need context and interpretation if they are going to support meaningful decisions. A strong report shows whether the numbers reflect stability, strain, improvement, or uncertainty, and it connects those conditions back to practical choices, such as continuing current treatment, increasing oversight, funding improvement, or revisiting previously accepted residual exposure. Another major part of this topic is connecting control information directly to decision logic. Stakeholders should not receive a report and then be left to guess whether they are merely being informed, asked to approve something, expected to escalate an issue, or supposed to support a corrective action. Control reporting becomes much more powerful when it makes the practical consequence clear. If a control assessment suggests the safeguard is weaker than assumed, the report should explain what that means for current risk acceptance, treatment timing, or business activity. If control performance is improving, the report should explain whether that supports greater confidence or simply shows early progress that still needs monitoring. Beginners often think reports should remain neutral to the point of vagueness, but decision support requires some directness. The goal is not to pressure stakeholders into one answer. It is to show them what the control information means for the decisions they hold, so that they can respond with awareness rather than treating the report as background material with no immediate consequence. Uncertainty should also be communicated honestly in control reporting, because control information is not always complete, final, or equally strong in every area. An assessment may cover only part of the environment. Evidence may be solid in one process and still emerging in another. A reported improvement may depend on assumptions that have not yet been tested over time. Strong reporting does not hide those limitations behind polished language. It makes them visible enough that stakeholders understand where confidence is high and where caution is still warranted. This is especially important in risk-based decisions, because false certainty can lead leaders to accept exposure they do not fully understand. Beginners sometimes think a good report should sound fully resolved and highly confident, but mature reporting distinguishes clearly between what is known, what is improving, what remains fragile, and what still needs validation. That honesty does not weaken the report. It strengthens it by making the decision-maker's understanding more realistic and by reducing the chance that leadership will act on control information that sounds stronger than the evidence truly supports. There are several common mistakes that can weaken this whole process, and they are worth recognizing early. One is reporting control information in a way that is too technical for the audience, which can make real weaknesses sound like abstract process details. Another is focusing only on whether a control exists, while giving too little attention to consistency, maturity, scope, and trend direction. A third is separating control reporting from risk decision-making so completely that stakeholders receive information about control health without understanding what business judgment it should influence. There is also the risk of presenting too much data with too little explanation, which creates activity without insight. Beginners should understand that strong reporting requires selectivity, interpretation, and courage. It is not enough to present evidence. The person reporting must help the audience see the significance of that evidence, especially when it challenges earlier assumptions about how safe, stable, or well-governed the environment really is. Otherwise, the organization may believe it is practicing risk-based decision-making while actually making choices on incomplete or misunderstood control information. As you step back from the details, the core lesson becomes very clear. Reporting control information and supporting risk-based decisions means translating the condition of the control environment into communication that helps stakeholders judge whether current safeguards justify confidence, require improvement, or call for a change in business judgment. Done well, this kind of reporting helps leaders understand not only what the controls are, but how much they can rely on them, how control conditions are changing over time, and what those changes mean for risk acceptance, treatment, investment, and oversight. Done poorly, it leaves decision-makers with either too little insight or too much unshaped detail, and neither of those supports wise choices. For someone new to this topic, the most important takeaway is simple but important. Controls matter most when their real condition is visible to the people making decisions. Reporting makes that visibility possible, and when it is clear, timely, relevant, and honest, it becomes one of the strongest links between control work and sound organizational judgment.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.